I'm John Crand, and today we're at the Hall Farm in Simsbury, Connecticut. We're going to hook up with Kris McCue, who is works for the Bionutrient Food Association, and she's going to show us various regenerative agricultural practices that she has put into action in her experimental garden plot here at the organic farm. So come join us.
All right, so good morning. My name is Kris McCue, and I want to welcome you guys to the George Hall Organic Farm here in Simsbury. This is, I believe, one of the first certified organic farms in the state of Connecticut. What I am doing with an educational nonprofit called the Bionutrient Food Association is separate from the farm. Darren was very generous in allowing us to take over originally 4,000 square feet in the middle of the field. It has now grown to about 8,000 square feet so that we could experiment. And we were learning a lot of things that were new to us about soil biology and microbiology and soil chemistry. And we felt it would really be nice to have a place where we can invite anyone, the public, children, friends, whoever, to come and see it and get their hands on it and taste it and see what the difference was. And so when we talked to Darren about it, he said, yeah, sure, pick a spot. So we ended up in the middle of his field. And at the time when he inherited the farm, having grown up on an organic farm, he saw where organics was, really beneficial, but there were also limitations where certain things were still happening, certain issues in the field, and he wondered if maybe looking into the biological, ecological, regenerative farming, there's many different, phrases to describe it, rejuvenating the health of the soil was going to help him alleviate some bug pressure and some insect and airborne pathogens and blights and things of that nature. And so it kind of helped him out by us taking this demonstration plot and starting to put things in motion. He could keep an eye on it and see how this was working, how much work it took, how much resources it took to make the change happen. And then he could figure out, all right, now how can I transition this into 30, 50, 100 acres?
Wow, and then a lot of it is no-till also in the regenerative agriculture.
Least disturbance. No-till as much as possible. So no-till is great, but not all farms are able to do that. If you have to rototill, we recommend that you keep it as shallow as possible. Do just the top inch or two so you're not disturbing the soil structure of the whole root zone of the plant. And there are other things that you can do instead of rototilling, such as using cover crops, using heavy mulches, rotating livestock. Most people think that by having animals, whether it's chickens, pigs, cows, whatever, on the land is going to compact it and do bad things to the soil. Actually, if you look to nature, animals have always been part of the system of soil health. There have always been grazing animals and birds and bovines and whatnot that have been passing through, and they're going to actually help make little chinks in the soil that allows more air and water to get in. They're going to fertilize it with their manure and their urine. They're going to graze down plants and keep them from getting out of control. There's a lot of benefit. And in my opinion, we haven't improved upon it. We're not doing it better than nature did.
Interesting. Wow. So how would a field like this, like a farmer or even a home grower, if we're going to do a small patch, how would you take a piece of land in this state, in a field situation, and get it to the point of the processes that you go through to make it for planting vegetables, let's say?
Mm-hmm. You want to knock this all down and give it a chance to be on the ground while the ground is warm and the soil biology and microbiology is really active, because they're going to start coming up to the surface and feeding on this and decomposing it and bringing it back down into the soil and basically turning it into soil. Knocking this all down to the ground and leaving it or covering it with something to smother it. Excuse me. Solarizing is a really good thing to do to prevent weeds from growing back up. It's where you put down plastic over an area and then you put sandbags or something to weight it on the side because you don't want a lot of air getting underneath it. And you would only do that for, maybe a day or two. You don't want to leave the plastic on too long because you can actually kill the soil life.
So you have to be careful about not baking the soil microbes.
Exactly, because you don't want to kill the life that's in your soil. You want them to jump right back to work as soon as you take that off. And here's another thing, when people are rototilling, they're actually planting a new crop of seeds every single time. They're planting new weeds. There's a gazillion, you couldn't even count how many weed seeds are in the soil at any given time. So every single time we rototill our soil or, are in there flipping it and disturbing it, we're planting a whole new crop of weeds. So the more you can do to smother them, just keep it covered, keeps them from growing. I use straw if I can get it. I use chopped leaves. I use seaweed if I can get it. Corrugated cardboard works well too, and that's usually pretty easy to come by.
So laying the cardboard down after you, let's say, mowed a patch down, that would, and how long would that take for it to kill or suppress the grass or vegetation?
Instant, it happens instantly.
Does it?
Yeah, no light, no air, no water, water will get through it once it's soaked through the cardboard, but there's not going to be any sunlight, so the weeds can't grow through the cardboard. And you just leave the cardboard down. The worms and the other critters in the soil are just going to eat it. They're going to incorporate it, and it'll become part of the soil.
Interesting. Wow.
The first thing that we did was take a soil test and send that into Logan Labs in Ohio. That's the one that the BFA uses and recommends. And then we had the BFA's agronomist, David Forster, go over the results for us and give us the minerals that we needed. We'd put down basalt, rock dust, and we put down some calcium carbonate, the high cal lime, because we did need that. And we put down some manure, and then we topped it with a good thick coating of leaves. And so then in the spring was when we started adding the other minerals once the soil had warmed up. So this is the garden space. What's inside of the fence was our original 4,000 square feet, and then this strip along the outside was added sort of incrementally. When we first took this over, the section that's inside the fence was not being farmed at that point. I am told that it had been in parsley and maybe a root crop or something a couple years before that, but it was highly compacted. You literally could not poke your fingernail. It's like what we're walking on. That's what this soil felt like.
This is what it looked like.
Right. And so we had a big discussion to till or not to till. The faster thing to do would have been to get in there and, just do it once. Just rototill it and get it nice and fluffy. And I insisted that, nope, where's the fun if there's not a challenge? We're going to do this and see if we can get nature to move back in here and do the rototilling for us. And in the spring, when we first started working the soil a little bit, we did bring in broad forks because we knew we needed to break through the compaction. We had to give a chance for some water and some air to get down into the root zone. It was really hard to get the broad fork into the soil because there were so many rocks. As you all know, New England grows rocks better than anything else. There were no worms, none. Not one worm anywhere. And we were not surprised because the soil was just so compacted.
Does that work? Is it like a big, kind of like a
well, I can show you because I have one in my tool shed. I'll show you the broad fork. Slam it into the ground. I can't slam it in hard enough, so I usually have to rock back and forth a little on it, and then you just sort of do this. And I've now...
so you get it started. You're just kind of aerating the...
Exactly. I've now made some holes where some rain and some air can get down in there. And so, you take it, you slam it in as best you can, and then you jump on it and you rock on it a little or just jump on it. Yeah. Depends on the compaction and how many rocks you have, how deep you can get it. But the point is not to then, take it and pull it all the way down and flip it over. It's more just to rock it back and forth, and you've now just kind of loosened things up a little. And it's disturbance, but it's less disturbance than if I went through here with a rototiller.
Right, with the rototiller or a plow.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is really about compaction, helping to relieve that and to allow places where water and air can get through. It is doing nothing for weed growth or anything of that nature. That's where the hoe comes in, or some other tool, smothering or flame weeding. Basically, anything that happens in the soil is mirrored by what's happening in our body. The soil has a microbiome the same as we do.
Yeah, and people don't realize that. And the medical profession doesn't, like nutrition, they don't seem to identify the whole the web. It's really a web of life.
Absolutely.
As you're saying, Kris, in the soil and in our bodies.
Yeah.
We are an extension of the earth.
Right.
We evolved from the earth.
And so then the next thing to do, once we were able to, get the broad fork through, was keeping the ground covered so it would stay moist, it would stay dark. We wanted to make it a friendly place so that the worms, we assumed, looking at the greenery all around here, we assumed there had to be plenty of worms and other, soil biology available. They just weren't in our space because it wasn't very friendly in our space.
Mm-hmm.
So by helping the conditions be a little bit better, we noticed over time that the wildlife, the critters did move back in.
They would migrate on their own.
Yeah. And I mean, certainly what worm can refuse a big pile of leaves? You cover the ground with leaves so and they're going to be right in there starting to...
So you were bringing them in with the organic material.
Right.
I see.
Yeah.
So how many, this new part here that you were talking about earlier with the compaction, now what year are we in right now seeing the beans and the different...
For this, I'd say it's probably there's 3 different sections actually. For this, it'd probably be year 2.
Oh, wow.
So 2016 was the year that we started the main garden, and that year, way down there where you see tall, that's actually sorghum, not corn.
Sorghum.
In that section, I did sort of a lasagna garden thing. I put down manure and wood chips and some compost and some seaweed. And we did soil tests there first, I should say, and we did add some mineral amendments based on our soil test. And then we just threw down layers and put the corrugated cardboard down and then put some wood chips on top of that just to hold them in place. And then we left it. We tried to put the broad fork around and it just wasn't happening. So I just said, all right, we're just going to leave this area and we'll just plant on top. So all I did was take some soil that I robbed from other places and I just made straight lines in it and then I planted some pumpkins. So that was a pumpkin patch the first year.
So you did organic material on the compacted soil and then added kind of inoculated it with soil. That was soil that had been used. It was viable soil. And then planted into that.
Would have been year 4. I was like so excited when I got in there to start working in the spring because you could finally get your hand into it. The 1 year after we started that as a pumpkin patch, the following year I was really interested to see, all right, so is that cardboard still there? What's going on? There was a little cardboard here and there, but for the most part that had been consumed and pretty much all the leaves and the other stuff underneath it had become part of the soil, but there was still compaction. So each year I've just layered on more, and I've done a lot with cover crops down there. And this year I was finally able to get my hands in there. It was exciting to see that the soil was coming back to life. The worms like crazy in there, and they're going to rototill better than anything.
Interesting. So, and that's in a relatively short period of time when you think of it.
I'd say it took 4 years. So
4 years,
does take some patience, but I was able to use the spot. There is a way you can do both. You can, rejuvenate your soil and you can harvest things from it.
And then as far as the carbon sink, like as far as the climate, this is locking up a lot of carbon.
Keep that soil covered. Keep life in the soil as much as possible.
And feed it with the carbon material.
Yeah.
So that would be your premise of...
Living mulches wherever possible over dried mulches. But if you can't have living cover crop plants as sort of the understory for the other crop plants that you have, then by all means use wood chips, use shredded leaves, use whatever is provided for you locally. Seaweed if you can get it, or go to the forest and get leaves there. Whatever
And
is
the leaf
local.
mold that's in the forest.
Yeah, because then you're adding more soil microbiology. Been learning about cover crops and things like daikon radish or tillage radish, and sorghum Sudan grass, and things that are going to have root systems that can really break up the compaction. And so we cover cropped this whole thing.
So that's what I want to do, because on our acreage, I'm going to plant some cover crops. So where would you recommend getting the cover crop seeds? Would we go for a big mixture of different?
The more variety you can get, the better. As you look out in nature, you don't see monocropping anywhere. Even in a weed patch, you're going to see, could be a dozen, could be more than a dozen different types of plants. The more diversity you have above ground, the more diversity you have below ground. You want to invite everyone to that party. You want every different type of, fungus and algae and bacteria and insects and microbes. You want all these different guys down there working for you, unlocking all the nutrients in your soil for the plants that you are trying to grow. So the more different types of roots you can put in the ground, the more benefit there will be to it.
So it's all about biodiversity.
Yeah, I know some
soil and
yeah.
below.
Yep, I know some farmers try and address specific nutrient deficiencies by growing specific cover crops. Someone might put in a whole field of buckwheat or a whole field of a type of bean because they need more nitrogen in the soil. That's certainly fine if there's a specific thing you're trying to address. But if it's just a general, then yeah, the more diversity you have, the better. I know there's a number of different places you can get cover crop seeds, like Fedco Organic Growers Supply, Lancaster Ag. I don't know if any of the local stores are carrying cover crop seeds. Absolutely go into your seed box, your seed collection for your garden seeds,
and just
clean it out. Anything that's getting a little old, or I wasn't really a fan of this, mix it all together and pitch it out there. Anything growing is roots in the ground, it's photosynthesizing, and it's feeding your soil.
I think that's one of the best tips.
And let your own plants go to seed and save your own seeds and replant them to improve the quality of the seed supply that you're using, and also just to grow your own cover crop seeds.
Wow.
For the most part, when you're growing cover crop, you don't want to let whatever it is go to seed. I don't want winter rye and I don't want vetch, because those tend to be hard to knock down. I would have to do some pretty invasive stuff to prevent those from regrowing. Annual rye and all the other cover crops that I've talked about that I've used here are winter kill. The freezing in the winter will kill them, and they will not be a big issue.
So the winter kill ones are annual rye, and what's the next one?
Oats, peas, barley, the clovers. There's a lot of them that are annuals.
So we want to stick to the annual, so that way it will die in the spring. You could hoe in and start another crop of something.
Right.
Okay. So if you were to plant in that patch of buckwheat, you would just use a hoe probably at this point, and just kind of chop in and make up.
If I wanted to plant in that right now, I'd take my scythe through there and just level everything down as close to ground level as I could, and then I would take my hoe and just clear patches here and there. The plant matter above ground, as it hits the ground, it's going to make a thick carpet. It's going to be difficult for what's underneath to grow up through that very quickly. So I should be able to get my own plants established.
So you make these pockets that you're going to plant into.
Yeah. Anything that disturbs the soil the least is going to be better.
It's going to be better.
The less weight and compaction you have, the better. The more living roots you have on the soil throughout the year, the better.
The better it's going to be. Yeah. Now, after you did the light rototilling and the 2 years of the cover crops, the mixed cover crops, how did you prepare the soil for planting? Did you use the...
A hoe. I just took a hoe and just scratched the surface.
So that's all you needed at that point.
Weeds are actually great to leave because they can be cut and come again mulch. You can use them to cover the soil to keep the soil moist and dark so that all your soil biology is active.
So you're doing a cut and drop method.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And by leaving the roots in the ground, as those decompose, they're going to leave channels for air and water to get into the soil. And as the roots are decomposing, it's the biology in the soil that's doing that and that's consuming it. So you're feeding your soil biology.
So they're actually doing the work for us.
Yes.
Wow.
But one of the other things about this garden that's pretty surprising is we do not irrigate. There is irrigation.
Interesting.
In the greenhouse over there, there is a pump with a hose attached to it. But I kind of gauge by the irrigation pond over there. And as the water level in that gets lower and lower, I feel like I cannot in good conscience be watering this garden when Darren has the cash crops. He's got tomatoes and all sorts of things growing in the field up here. He does have the drip irrigation. He needs the water. I can't be using it. Now I am lucky that with the soil makeup that we do have here on the farm, it does hold water very well. And by using a lot of mulches, living mulches and dry mulches, I'm able to keep the moisture level. You will not see like dry soil.
You're able to conserve the moisture into the soil.
Right. So I did purchase a whole lot of bales of straw and put them down, and so there's still an awful lot of that organic matter covering the soil. So I will probably not do as much cover cropping up here because my soil is still protected.
The soil has been built up, and
Right.
because how many years?
And I don't remove any of this plant matter at the end of the season when the plants are spent. That's where they stay and just
so
become
that's
part
all
of the soil.
chopped and dropped, or just drop and then it just
Yeah.
disintegrates.
They
over the
become part
winter?
of the mulch covering the surface. I've been learning a lot from a gentleman named John Kempf. He has a business, Advancing Eco-Agriculture. He talks a lot about the health of the plants, and actually the founder of the BFA, Dan Kittredge, has also talked about this a lot. Plants that are producing superior quality health components are repellent to insects.
Okay.
Insects don't have the same digestive system that we do. They cannot eat those higher level nutrients that we really need for our health. Lipids are one of the things that a plant will produce when they're at their peak health, and insects cannot digest that. Plants give off sort of electrical signals, and the insects can tell which plants are weaker by the signals they're giving off. They can tell which ones they can eat and which ones they want to eat. If your plants are super healthy and producing those higher level secondary metabolite compounds, insects pass them over. They won't eat them. And there's a lot of variables along the way, starting with the seeds that we're using. Not all seeds are created equal. You need to look at the health of the seed, the density of your seeds. Were your seeds raised on a farm or in a place where they were constantly fertilized and watered and fussed with, or were they grown in a place where the plant was expected to establish a relationship with the soil, the sun, the photosynthesis, and pumping some of the sugars out through the roots, through the exudates to feed the soil biology, and having this system of life in place? Those are the seeds I want. I want to know, were my seeds biodynamic? Were they organic? Were they certified organic? Give me the name of the farmer so I can look up their farm and see what their practices are. The more information I have, the better of a consumer, the more educated consumer I'm going to be. I start later than most people. I learned from the BFA that whatever it says on a seed packet, if it says to start it 8 to 12 weeks before you're going to plant it outside, cut that in half. I put my tomatoes in the ground when they're literally an inch or two tall. Basil plants, 1/2 inch to 1 inch. I want things tiny because I don't want to interrupt their growth trajectory. The more we can do to bring in more biology and microbiology, the more health we're going to have in our soil. Well, one of the things I had learned was about harvesting indigenous microorganisms and about fermenting weeds, because then you're taking the mineral content of the weed, the plant, you're also taking whatever biology is on the surface of the plant and you're magnifying it by the fermentation process. Right. Getting back to the nutrients on a plant and insects, we were talking about having issues with the brassicas before.
Yeah.
So one spring, it was last spring, I had kale at the south end and the north end of the garden. I had 2 different patches of it. One was sort of on the outside over there, and one was down this end. They were getting hammered by the flea beetles. Both patches looked like paper lace, and so I decided to do a trial. And in one section, I decided to go with bug suppressant, so to speak. And in the other section, I decided to go with total nutrients. I wanted to raise up the nutritional level of my plants to make them undigestible to the insects. So in one section, I didn't use any sort of scientific method on this. I just went with gut instinct. I've fermented lots of different weeds and plants over the years, and I have sort of a stockpile of those. And I have some other liquid amendments, like I do a lactobacillus ferment that I use to add some extra biology to plants, raw milk, molasses, things of that nature. So I mixed up a liquid, it was 1 quart, and I just put in a spoonful of fermented purslane and fermented burdock and just a bunch of different my weeds, and then I added a little bit of milk, molasses, and some of my lactobacillus ferment, just like a spoonful of each. And then another 1 quart, I used neem oil. It was maybe a teaspoon, and then a drop of dish soap. I used like a Dr. Bronner's. It was pure soap. I didn't want any colors.
Soap.
Yeah, I didn't want any additives to it. So in one section, it was about getting rid of the bugs, by
using the neem.
Yeah, neem sort of as a natural, repellent or insecticide, so to speak. And then in the other section, it was about making the plants indigestible. Both sections had the exact same results. Over 2 weeks, I foliar sprayed, which is misting the foliage. I foliar sprayed 3 times. The insects left off in both sections, and the plants resumed growing, and no more. I could tell from other places around the farm that there were still flea beetles present, but they were not bothering my plants. So to my way of thinking, why in the world would I spray insecticide to keep insects off of plants that are sickly? I don't want to eat those ones. It makes more sense to me to bump up the nutritional level of my plants, making them indigestible to the bugs and yet more nutritious for me.
So that's the way to go, is the nutrition, the health of the soil, the nutrition of the plants.
So this is our doorway over here. Amazingly good work that's being done all around the country, around the world really. There are some huge operations, big ranches and huge farms in Australia and in Europe and even out our country out in the Midwest, where they are restoring the health of their soil and they're doing everything right. Those are the people that we need to be hearing about and we need to be talking up and supporting, and making sure that we're buying their products or doing what we can to encourage them to keep going and to do more. Hope, after all. Look at all this good stuff that's happening out there.